So good morning, everybody. My name is Krishna Rajagopal. I'm a professor of physics at MIT, and it's my privilege to introduce you today to 802X. In 802X, you're going to learn electricity and magnetism, and I thought the best way of starting, actually, was to start by showing you the whole course in a single slide. So on this slide, we have Maxwell's equations, and what we will be doing over the course of 802X, over the course of an entire semester, is we will be building up an understanding of where these equations come from, what they describe, how they work, how to use them. But this is all of 802X on a single slide. Now, many of you may have learned some electricity and some magnetism previously in high school. And in high school, when you talk about electricity, you typically start out by talking about here's a charge and here's a charge and there's a force between them. It's Coulomb's law. Or maybe you have some magnets and you talk about the force between magnets. North repels north and north attracts south. So you're talking about magnets and forces between magnets, or charges and forces between charges. And one of the big themes of 802X is going to be that actually the fundamental players in electricity and magnetism are not the charges, and they're not little bar magnets, and they're not the currents in wires. They really are the electric and magnetic fields, the E, the electric field, and the B, the magnetic field, which you see in Maxwell's equations here. And what we will be doing as we build up the structure of 802X, as we build up the structure of electricity and magnetism, of our fundamental understanding of how electricity and magnetism work, what we will be doing is we'll be understanding these equations one by one, piece by piece. We'll be understanding how they describe electric and magnetic fields, where those fields come from, how they're made, what they do, how they ripple, how they affect charges and currents. All of this is what we're going to be building up over the course of the semester. Now, at the bottom of the slide, you see the Lorentz force law. That's actually the piece that comes from high school, because that is the piece that tells you about the forces that the electric and magnetic fields create. And that's important too, but by the end of the semester you'll realize that it's Maxwell's equations that are more fundamental, and you'll notice that there's no F for force in those equations, just E's and B's. So before we dive in, before we get started building up these equations, what we're going to do in the rest of today is I'm going to address the why question. Why should you spend about a semester's worth of time learning these equations and what they describe? And why should I spend a semester's worth of time teaching it to you? After all, these are Maxwell's equations. They were first written down by this gentleman in 1864, well over 100 years ago. In fact, more than 150 years ago now. Why should we today in 2018 spend a semester understanding these equations written down by James Clerk Maxwell so long ago? Well, the first answer is that these equations describe an enormous amount of natural phenomena and of technology. They describe electricity, as you see here. They describe magnetism, as you see here, represented by this magnet. Or in this image, this is a group of MIT students trying to pull a piece of iron out from a giant magnet. So these MIT students are feeling the magnetic force exerted by a really rather large electromagnet on a piece of iron. These are the kinds of things that are described by those equations. But those equations describe much, much, much more. They describe an enormous array of phenomena and technologies. So here's a very simple piece of technology described by Maxwell's equations. But Maxwell's equations also describe very complex technology. In fact, they describe any electric circuit. So this is a circuit diagram of a moderately complex electric circuit. All the elements in this, the currents in the wires, and every little element shown in this diagram are all described by Maxwell's equations. And in fact, you know, inside my cell phone and yours, there are vastly more complex circuits than what you see on the screen. And all of that technology inside this phone at a fundamental level is governed by Maxwell's equations. So Maxwell's equations describe the technology underlying many, many, many aspects of our life today. Maxwell's equations also describe many natural phenomena. This is just one simple example of a phenomenon that you're all familiar with that is completely governed by Maxwell's equations. So one of the reasons for learning Maxwell's equations is to understand at a fundamental level how these phenomena and these technologies work. But one of the amazing things about Maxwell's equations is that you get out more from them than, in fact, you put in to deriving them, to understanding them for the first time. You thought you were going to use them to describe electric and magnetic forces, but what he realized is that hidden in these equations, there was the possibility of waves, that the E and the B can ripple back and forth, and E makes a B makes an E, and E makes a B makes an E, and you can get a rippling solution of electric and magnetic fields, which travels at the speed of light. And he made this prediction in 1864, and it was about 20 plus years later, in 1887, that this gentleman, whose name is Heinrich Hertz, discovered for the first time these wave solutions to Maxwell's equations. We now use these waves for many, many things. In fact, it's these waves that are used by my cell phone to get its signal or to send signals. So these waves described by Maxwell's equations, which we're going to learn in 802X, are radio waves, they are television signals, they are Wi-Fi, they are microwaves in your microwave oven, and they are, in fact, light. Maxwell himself realized that he had found in his equations waves traveling at the speed of light, and he guessed that probably light itself was described by his equations, and in fact he was correct. So at the very end of 802X, in the last module, we'll start to learn about these waves. We'll start to learn about how Maxwell's equations have hidden in them the physics of rainbows as well as the physics of electric and magnetic forces. Maxwell's equations describe a whole range of natural phenomena, including light and rainbows. But one of the amazing things about them, which arises because they are fundamental, they were discovered in 1864, yes, but they are good forever. One of the amazing things about them is that they're a gift that keeps on giving. So here's an example of a new technology very recently developed. And several years ago, my colleague at MIT, Marin Soljasic, realized that there was a new way of using Maxwell's equations to actually deliver power to an object like this without having to plug it in. And that he started a company. The company is called Witricity. That company is developing the technology based on his discovery. And Witricity now makes it possible to take your laptop, bring it home. If it's your laptop, which is powered by Witricity, take your laptop, bring it home, and put it on one of the black pads in this picture. And the laptop then gets charged wirelessly without you having to plug it in. This is an example of a new piece of technology that was developed just in the last 3-4 years, which is based on realizing that there was a new possibility encoded in Maxwell's equations that no one had realized before Marin did. So even though they were first written down more than 150 years ago by this gentleman, these equations, because they are fundamental in the way that I've described, because they will always be the description of electricity and magnetism and light, and now Witricity, and then in the future, whatever you discover that you can do with them. So that makes them worth understanding, and that's our goal in 802X.